Tēnā koutou katoa. I find it very helpful to explain that I did not go to Antarctica. The Subantarctics is its own region, and New Zealand looks after several islands. And because I wasn't leaving New Zealand, technically, I managed to convince my insurers that my contents policy should still be valid. With all that in place, we headed out on a 1,400 round trip, leaving from Bluff on a beautiful summer's day in January. This trip cost between $7,000 and $10,000 per person. It was 2014. I was a broke master's student, but I was named the Spirit of Enderby Youth Scholar after winning a film competition. There were 4 other scholarship recipients on the trip with me, and that was us on the bow of the ship. We were the only other people under the age of 50 there. I also had to send in an application stating how I would advocate for the Subantarctics once I came home. I spoke about the incredible honour it would be to document a World Heritage Site, and how understanding what life is like there can help us realise the importance and urgency of acting on climate change. Our first stop was the snares, where introduced land mammals were never established, making it one of the most pristine and untouched places in the world. Land access is only permitted for research, so we experienced the island by zodiac. This, other than the map, is the only photo I didn't take myself. 80% of the main island is covered in tree daisies, which grow to 5 meters tall. But the snares are also covered in bird life. Millions of sooty shearwaters arrive in the spring for the breeding season. But my favourite was undoubtedly the snares crested penguin. I love anybody who wears a bold outfit, and the snares crested penguins definitely have that look down. One of the most spectacular sights of the snares is the penguin slide, with many showing incredible grace and balance that I don't have. You can see how high it goes in this photo and get a glimpse of the masses of seaweed growing at the bottom. The penguins were also completely unbothered by us, just getting on with whatever penguins do. When we visited Enderby Island, one of the Auckland Islands, we were required to stay several metres away from all wildlife, and Doc recommends staying a distance of 20 metres between seals and sea lions. But nobody told the sea lions about these rules. Some of them were very curious, and we were instructed not to encourage them. Sea lions are very much like puppies, especially ones which had new humans to play with. We spent the day at Enderby walking a loop around the entire island, and Doc had put in some boardwalk to help protect it. Enderby was a very interesting experience. The scenery was incredible, diverse, from following penguins around cliffs, finding sea lion skeletons on the beach, to rata forests. I'm a big gardener and I love plants, and the Subantarctics are the place to see plants which don't grow anywhere else in the entire world. One of the other scholarship recipients was from the Dunedin Botanical Gardens and was collecting seeds for the Millennium Seed Bank. But my main problem was the plants really liked me. We were there in the summer, and the average temperature was around 10 to 12 degrees, and the wind chill makes it even colder, so layers are your friend. My mum made me some trick pants, which are great if you want to deal with wind chill, but also great if you're a sticky seed pod and want to move around the island. I like to think I would have positively contributed to the spread of several plants around the island that day. My other problem was that as a photographer, I was almost always last in the group. This involved me being left alone for one stretch of the island where you do not want to be alone. These tussocks were as tall as me, which was fine, but there were also sea lions, as tall as me, hiding in these tussocks. At one point I turned a corner and walked right around into a sleeping sea lion and very nearly became a sea lion dinner. Ngāi Tahu are the mana whenua of the Subantarctic Islands and have stories about the Auckland Islands, and archaeological findings there date back to the 13th century. However, neither Māori nor European settlements were successful, not to mention the 9 shipwrecks recorded. On our voyage was one person from the Chatham Islands who was following in the steps of his tupuna who travelled there. Another person was the daughter of a scientist who had been stationed on the island in World War II, when New Zealand was paranoid that Axis warships would use the route to sneak into the Pacific. We visited the huts he stayed in, which were now in ruin, and it was incredible to talk to people who had such personal connections to the islands. Campbell Island was our final stop, and it also had visible signs of human interference. This was the loneliest tree in the world, a 100-year-old spruce, with the nearest tree 222 kilometres away on Auckland Island. There were more failed attempts to settle this island, and by 1840, all the island's land birds had been wiped out by rats. It wasn't until the 1980s that we began to undo our damage. In 1987, the remaining cattle were removed. The last feral sheep by 1991. All the cats mysteriously died out in the 1990s, and I have no further info on that. By 2006, the world's largest rat eradication project had been successful, and the island was rat-free. The Campbell Island teal was reintroduced in 2004, and an absolute highlight for me was seeing the thriving albatross colony. On our first day, we walked through the albatross colony and through mega herbs and flower, and I was completely struck by how incredible this place was. It rains 325 days of the year. The wind reaches over 99 kilometers an hour on at least 100 days of the year, and yet there were birds and plants which were perfectly happy there and perfectly happy when we didn't make their lives any harder. Climate change has been something I've thought about since I first understood what it was. Humans are just a blip on the timeline of the world, and yet too often we don't think about everybody else that we share this planet with. Our world is incredible and spectacular and one of a kind. We've truly hurt these islands by putting our needs above the environment, and it has taken decades to undo this damage. You know, most of us are actually in agreement about climate change. 84% of New Zealanders think we can reduce climate change, and 79% agree that we need to act now. But we're not convinced that the people who need to act will. I spent my last day here halfway out Mount Honey on Campbell Island, thinking about how I would advocate for these islands, and when I got home, I knew I would use my photographs, but I wasn't sure I could do anything else. It's strange to think a trip to our most remote islands might cause a political awakening, but it did. I was so humbled to spend time in a place which was so extraordinary, but also made me realize that I needed to use every avenue I could to make sure it was protected. We know it's a problem, we know some things have to change, we just have to be courageous enough to do it. Thank you.